Job chapter 26. And I'm kind of glad no, I'm not glad. Maybe a little relieved we don't have visitors tonight because, okay, if you all were here when I taught on the gap, we're going to be covering some of that cosmology. Job goes from talking about them being judged to jumping off the deep end of the pool. And so we're going to be talking about things that are just, well, most Christians know nothing about it. And it's not that it would hurt a younger Christian. A lot of it would just bounce off of them. They might pick up a little bit, but they might be just a little bit overwhelmed by what we're going to cover tonight. All right, we left off in, I'll make sure where I did leave off. Let me make sure here. 5. Okay, I was about to start on the wrong page. All right, we left off at verse 5, and Job totally changes gears. I mean, and then I don't know if he's trying to impress his 3 friends by how much he knows, but man, he really goes into it. I'm going to read verse 5 to 9. That's all we're going to cover tonight, but you'll get the idea of how deep this thing is. Verse 5 says, "Dead things are formed from under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. Hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. He bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under them. He holdeth back the face of his throne, and spreadeth his cloud upon it." Do you think there's anything simple about any of those verses? I mean, it's like, oh. So he immediately goes from talking about them being judged and asking them a few questions to cosmology, the study of the universe. In philosophy, they call this metaphysics. Metaphysics is the philosophy or the nature of reality. Well, the Bible gives you true metaphysics, true cosmology, whereas the rest of the world, they're still guessing at a lot. And you'd be amazed how much they're lining up with the scriptures, and because all they can do is discover what God's already told you. That's the only thing they can do. And then when they do, they try to say, well, it's not exactly like that. No, it is exactly like that. And I read some things online today, and we'll get to that. But look at verse 5, and he says there, "Dead things are formed from under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof." Now, the rest of the context is about God's thrown on down to this area right here. I mean, just about that area right there in some of outer space. So I don't think he's talking about the Atlantic, the Pacific, or the Indian Oceans, okay, or the Mediterranean Sea, or the Caspian Sea, or whatever seas are out there. I don't think that's what he's talking about. I think he's talking about that body of water right there, that one above our universe. And you know where dead things are? They're underneath that body of water. All of them. Whether spiritual or physical, they're all under that water right there. So, now that's not what he says. Okay? I mean, he's saying that dead things are, they're under the water, but he said dead things are formed, and we will get to that. Okay? But first, let's talk about this is where dead things are. Revelation chapter 20, turn there, in verse 12 and 13. I know you've heard this verse 1,000 times, but we're going to look at it a little closer. "I saw the dead." Okay, this is when the dead are brought up before him at the great white throne judgment. "I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things which are written in the books according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it." And it says, "And death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were judged every man according to their works." Okay? He mentions 3 places. There's 3 places there. You say, what's death? Well, death would be where Abraham's bosom is. It's not hell, but it is a place where the dead go. The saints that died before the death, burial, and resurrection had to go somewhere. They could not ascend. They had no power to ascend, so they went down, and they went down to Abraham's bosom. We know from Luke 16 there's a great gulf between those things, where hell was on one side and Abraham's bosom was the air-conditioned, apartment building complex on the other. I don't know what it was. I know this, it wasn't a burning hell. They weren't being tormented. So when he says that death and hell delivered up the dead that were in them, I believe that's what he's talking about. He's not being metaphorical here. This is a place. Hell is a place where the unsaved dead are and evil spirits of a variety of sorts. Okay? So, they gave up the dead which were in them. And then it says the sea. Okay? Actually, it mentions the sea first. The sea gave up the dead which were in it. And I'm thinking, so far he hasn't really been talking about bodies. Okay? I mean, unless you want to say that death is the grave, and he's talking about souls. There's a place, the Old Testament word is Sheol. It's kind of a catch-all word for wherever the dead go. But he's talking about Abraham's bosom when he's talking about death, I believe, and hell, he's talking about hell beneath your feet. So when he says that sea, what is he talking about? Is he talking about people that have been buried at sea? Or is he talking about somebody that's dead in here? More and more, remember we talked about them angels? Where it says that a third of them are cast out? It didn't say they fell. It said they were cast out. They already fell. I am more of a mind to believe that when God drowns that thing out, is that the one where he drowned it out? When God drowns that thing out, they're all there. They're all there. And when he recreates it, they're all still there. What I said, the dead? He drowned them like men, I think. Or something to that thing. All I know is there's dead in there. Now, you say, how do you know that? Well, let me give you a verse here. Look at verse 12. And I need to look at that here. He divided the sea with his power. Not talking about the Mediterranean. And by his understanding, he smiteth through the proud. What? So when he's dividing, when he comes back, he divides that sea so that he can come back, and he's smiting through the proud. He said the heavens are not clean in his sight. They're up there. All of them. And what's here and in here is going to get cast down to here in the tribulation. Now that's what I keep coming to that conclusion. It doesn't make sense to me that all of a sudden after all this and Christ dying on the cross and redeeming folks and that all of a sudden a third of these angels decide to fall. I think they decided way back then. That's already a foregone conclusion. So when he says the sea gave up the dead, okay, exactly where is that seven-headed, fire-breathing aquatic dragon? Where is he at? He's in that great deep, isn't he? You know what he is? He's king over the children of pride, and he said he smiteth through the proud. So I just think that's very possibly the great deep that he's talking about there when he says that the sea, dead things are formed from under the waters and the inhabitants thereof. And when he says the sea gave up the dead which were in it in Revelation 20, I think that's what he's referring to. Now, fallen angels drowned as men in Noah's flood. I'm not talking about the Genesis 1-2 affair, but Noah's flood. Let me give you the verses on it real quick. Genesis 6:1-4. It came to pass when men began to multiply the face of the earth and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God, okay, after Adam sins, there are no sons of God being born of Adam and Eve. There's no sons of God that show up on this earth after these angels until Jesus Christ shows up. So the sons of God, the only ones that could show up, I should say, be born, they were showing up constantly, but these sons of God are the angels. It says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. They took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man. Well, our life comes from God. Their life comes from God. Our spirit come from God. Their spirit comes from God. He says, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. 120 years from that time frame, Noah's on a boat or on an ark, and the rain begins, and he drowns them out. It says there were giants in the earth in those days. Also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, that they bare children to them, and the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Okay? And Psalms 82 tells you what happened to these angels that fell. Psalms 82, verse 6 and 7, I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. Well, the angels are. They're the sons of God. But ye shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. The minute they decided to leave the third heaven, they were subject to mortality. They had to take on flesh. And that's something there that these are bloodless beings. So I'm not sure exactly what all that ramification is going to be when a third of them come down. Maybe they'll be looking for blood. I don't know. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 and 5 says, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah. So he drowned them. You see what? Under the water. Literally under the water. Dead things are formed under the waters. And he drowned them. And spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person. Lost souls are congregated under the waters. And I realize if we're using that as a body of water, that, that covers it all, man. Everything, anything that's dead is under that body of water. Psalm 118, 4 and 5, Psalm 18, verse 4 and 5 says, the sorrows of death compassed me, the floods of ungodly men made me afraid. Imagine a flood of ungodly men. The Bible talks about hell hath enlarged herself, and for good reason. The amount of men that end up going there. It says, the sorrows of hell compassed me about, the snares of death prevented me. Even unsaved men on earth are considered dead. Ephesians 2:1, and you hath he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sins. Proverbs 21:16, the man that wandereth out of the way of understanding shall remain in the congregation of the dead. So when he's talking about dead things under the water, well, there's plenty of them. But he says formed. Dead things. He didn't say they formed dead things. He said dead things are formed from under the waters. And I don't know, I can only think of one thing. And I didn't get this from Dr. Ruckman, but it's the thing that came into my mind. About all that other stuff, he mentioned something about that. But he didn't mention this, and this has always been interesting to me. Turn to Revelation chapter 9. There's something happening to the dead. They're being transformed into something. Now, whether they're dead angels or dead men, you can make that decision. It says, and the fifth angel sounded, look at verse 1, and I saw a star fall from heaven into the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit as the smoke of a great furnace. We're talking about hell here. He's opened a doorway to hell, like all the horror flicks, a doorway to hell, and some demon comes out. Well, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. Well, there goes your clean air. And there came out of the smoke locust. Now, you're going to find out these aren't your ordinary plant-eating locust. They're anything but those, but they appear like locust. And it says, locust upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. They got a power to hurt somebody. Now, you know what a scorpion has power to do? He puts you in a lot of pains, what he has power to do. Scorpions aren't usually fatal, but they are extremely painful to get stung by. They probably will kill you. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, or neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. These are selective locusts. They only go after people with the mark of the beast. Isn't that something? And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. So they got some type of stinger in their tail, and they're able to sting you over and over and over again, and you won't die. You just wish you were dead. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it. I don't know if there's anything worse than that. Wanting to die because you're in so much pain. There was I saw one time this documentary about these jellyfish that float around, and there's a certain kind of jellyfish. I don't know if they call it a box or whatever, but somebody else know about it? Anyway, they're smaller jellyfish, but you get into a swarm of those things, and they got this guy, and he's laying on the table, and he's in such pain, it's just off the charts, and nothing's touching it. I mean, they're giving him morphine, and he's just in literal agony on that table. And I thought, man, what kind of pain is he experiencing? But I mean, he's wanting to die. He's in so much pain. I mean, he's writhing, and there's nothing they could do to stop it. He'd been stung, I don't know how many times, by those jellyfish. It's going to be something like that. It says the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses. I got a feeling he's going to be a little bit bigger than your normal locust. Prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold. So imagine some critter coming at you, almost look like he's got a crown of gold on, and their faces were the faces of men, dead men that are formed, transformed. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. They had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. Not kill them, just hurt them. They had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit. We'll get into that. So you have this creature that comes, and it can't just be just one. It has to be thousands upon thousands and possibly millions. Now, Dr. Ruckman says that the souls of the unsaved dead come out of there and they've been transformed. Instead of evolving, it's a devolving. Evolution is not true. Devolution is. We are going to be transformed into an image like Jesus Christ, an image like our Father, because He's the express image of the Godhead. And those that wind up in hell devolve into something else. Talks about worms, where their worm dieth not, the fire is not quenched. But until then, evidently there's some transformation going on there where they're used in the tribulation to punish men that have taken the mark of the beast. Because he says dead things are formed from under the waters and the inhabitants thereof. So that's all I have on that. I don't know what else he could be talking about. And then he says in verse 6, hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. Now, I just told you hell's a place, but hell is also a personality. Just like death is also there's a personification of these things. Look in Revelation 6:8. Revelation 6:8, I looked and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. There's two horses there, by the way. Hell's on a horse and death's on a horse. And I think one of them's grizzled. One's a pale horse, that's what death sits on, and hell sits on a grizzled horse. I think you can find that there in the Old Testament. Huh? Is Zechariah? I think it is Zechariah, isn't it, for the grizzled horse? And you'd think, that sounds about right. Hell will be on a grizzled horse. Power is given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, with hunger, with death, and with the beast of the earth. But notice how it's personified. It's personified as like a rider on a horse. So you can have things personified there, and I think when he says hell is naked before him, there's nothing going on in hell that God doesn't see. It's as naked as any other place. He beholds the evil and the good. But it says destruction hath no covering. The place is underneath your feet, hell. Because he says in Isaiah 14:9, hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee. Even all the chief ones of the earth, it hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. So certain things stir up things down there. And evidently something's going to stir them up, let them out, or at least some of them. But it says, hell is naked before him, destruction hath no covering. Destruction, it can be personified, and it's personified in an angel. Revelation 9:11, which I think we read, and they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. Both Abaddon and Apollyon both mean the destroyer. So when he says destruction hath no covering, I mean, there is a destroyer, and he's coming back. Now, if you don't think that's so, or we may be taking it a little bit too far, look at Job 28:22. Turn there, Job 28:22. He says, destruction and death say, we have heard the fame thereof with our ears. Now, I don't know if is that Elihu talking? But notice he gives personality to, I'm sorry? Is it still Job? It gives personality to destruction and death. So when he says their destruction hath no covering, I believe he's referring to that personification of it. And it's that king that's down there. So hell has a king who walked on the earth with Jesus Christ. John 17:12 tells you that Judas is the son of perdition. Perdition, the Greek word Apollyon, the destroyer. We're talking about the same person, the same angel. He said, have I not chosen one of you 12 and one of you is a devil? John 6:70 and 71. So when we're talking about destruction, we are talking about that angel. And it says he goes to his own place in Acts 1:25. He went right back to where he belongs. He's the angel of destruction. But he showed up here on this earth, and that was Judas. I know it's hard for me to listen to any message that has Judas getting right with God. I can't deal with it. I'm like, you have to reject so many verses of Scripture to come up with that. All you see Judas doing is contemplating and doing damage control from the decisions that he's making, and God's outsmarting him every step of the way. But there's no repentance there where he throws down I'm sorry I betrayed the innocent blood. He's not sorry at all. He's sorry he just got caught. He realizes the gig is up, that Jesus Christ is going to do something he never thought he would do, and he's trying to undo it, trying to stop it. And it's too late. But in Revelation 17:18, one thing Doc says about Judas, he took the Lord's Supper, he was baptized, took the Lord's Supper, repented to a priest, died and went to hell. So there you go. Stick to your religion like Judas and you'll wind up in the lake of fire. He did die and go to hell. I mean, that's his place. He's the king over it. 17:18. That's not the verse I was hoping to. I got the wrong verse, I think. Well, I'm not sure now. Talks about him returning. Okay. Okay. Huh? 17:8. Oh, there you go. That's it. So it's not 18, it's just 17:8. Thank you, Emily. The beast that thou sawest was, it is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. The same place these creatures come from, he's coming from. And go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. Well, he was Judas Iscariot. And he is not. Now he's back. I'm back. And when he comes back, you're going to have destruction. So hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. He stretcheth out the north, verse 7, over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. So, this would be in the recreation. This is after Genesis 1:2, and God starts the recreation, and this is our best guess of how it might have been thrown together, or how he put it together. And he talks about there the north, which we'll get into that a little bit more. But he mentioned this, it's about the heavens. And this is a beaten out, firm expanse of firmament. He stretcheth out. Genesis 1, verse 6 to 8. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament. This is that firm firmament, where it talks about where the birds fly is an open firmament. This is firm, okay? Divide the waters from the waters. The rest of the waters are congregated here on earth in all the oceans and seas and stuff. And he separated two. Of course, he didn't leave. I mean, most of it's up here, but he did separate the waters from the waters. And then he said, let all the waters come together. And God made a firmament, divide the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. It was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day. So that's the water he's talking about. And this firm expanse, that he calls heaven, is directionally north. This is where most folks, we think of heaven almost like, you're sitting on a cloud, or it's no specific place, but you're strumming a harp, and people's idea of these things. What they don't realize is that in a place called heaven, you could stomp your feet on something solid. You'll be on solid ground, because it's a place. It's a literal place. And the Bible talks about it over and over again, that it's north. Now, not the North Pole, but if you were to look at the North Star in that general direction, north of our universe, that's where it is. Let's look at a few verses here. Psalm 75, verse 6 and 7. This verse says, for promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south, but God. Replaces God for north. But God is the judge. He putteth down one, setteth up another. Psalms 48:2, great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, and the mountain of his holiness. Now I realize there's one here on earth. But originally, I thought, that's one of them critters. Sound like a locust, didn't it? All right. The city of our God, the mountain of his holiness, beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth, is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. When Satan rebelled, he said this, for thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Notice it's above the stars. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. So he's ascending these sides. That's the sides of the north. There's where the throne of God is, sitting on that great deep. Actually sitting on the face of that thing. The face of this firmament is frozen crystals like a sea of glass. Job 38:30, the waters are hid as with a stone, the face of the deep is frozen. We talked about, when we studied this, the third law of thermodynamics, where entropy is equivalent to zero, and that's when it would near at absolute zero, or what we call 0 degrees Kelvin, and all molecular action ceases, and there's nothing falling apart in heaven. And that's exactly what your Bible, it talks about crystalline structure, where there's no entropy. Revelation 4:6, and before the throne was a sea of glass like unto crystal. And in the midst of the throne and round about the throne were 4 beasts full of eyes before and behind. So there's no entropy there. So the deep forms a glass that we see through, because he calls it a sea of glass in Revelation 4:6. He said, before the throne was a sea of glass like unto crystal. It's frozen. You're getting two different accounts, but y'all ever been on a lake that's been frozen, that there was no wind or anything like that? And I mean, it's like it's glass. It looks like glass. It feels like glass. And you wouldn't, and cold, by the way. But this is how that face of that great deep, and we've kind of got waves over here that she's produced wave. But no, it's just as level as it could be. But the face of that thing's frozen. Underneath, it's not. The face of it, I'm talking about this face, is frozen. And God's throne, obviously this is a huge place, but God's throne is sitting on that glass, on that sea of glass. That's why I said heaven's a literal place. It's not some nirvana or anything like that. It's interesting that the Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians 13:12, it says, for now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now, some people try to tell you that's the Bible. That's not the Bible. The implication here is when we look through the Bible, we see through a glass darkly. Okay, not that the Bible's dark, it's just that we can't possibly know everything that's in this book. I'm sorry? Yes. We're looking through, or mankind's looking through something that's darkened, they can't see him. Yes. That's why he dwells in the outer darkness. The Lord has made it to where man cannot see him. And they know there's something illuminating our universe. They know there's some kind of light. They don't know what it is. They know there's some background radiation. They don't, cosmic radiation. They're trying to, I don't know what they're going to try to tell you that comes from. If you took even though there are billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of planets and galaxies, there's more space out there than anything else. I mean, you could probably take everything and put it into a corner and you'd have nothing but empty space for a good majority of our universe. But we see through a glass darkly. The world does. But then face to face. I mean, one of these days, he's going to roll back that great deep. God's going to expose himself. And when he does, the whole universe burns up. What the Bible likens it, let me read this. Job 37:18 says, hast thou with him spread out the sky, which is strong and has a molten looking glass. A molten looking glass. You know that in a mirror, they darken the backside of a mirror. And that's how this thing is. It's if man could get there, it'd be like a mirrored image up there. I mean, he'd have to get through the deep and everything else, but before he ever got to the third heaven, he'd have to do some swimming. It's probably a billion or two light years away. But he'd come across that. They used to say if we had a telescope strong enough that we could look that far, that if you could see it, you'd see an eyeball looking back at you. I don't know if that's a reflection of your eyeball or what. But every compass, every needle on a compass on this world points that direction. Every compass points toward God. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place. That empty place exists. They have found it. They'll tell you about it. You'll get all different kind of opinions. Some of them call it the hole in the universe. They believe it is, 1 billion light years across. Now, a light year, if you want to know how big that is, 1 light year is like 3 trillion miles. And this is 1 billion light years. And you say, what's there? Well, they can't find nothing there. It's just some call it a hole, but it's not a hole. I'll tell you what one guy called it, and we're going to be getting down into that a little bit. He called it a cloud. He might be right. Now, I want to mention, it says he hangeth the earth upon nothing. Okay? Do you know when Job wrote that? Or when that was written? That was written around 1800 BC. Do you know when we found out the earth wasn't attached to anything? Where they had a pretty good idea that it wasn't? Around 1400 AD. 3,200 years ahead of science. Because up until then, they believed it was attached to something. You know, some had it on Atlas holding it up, on the back of a turtle, you know. Maybe it had something underneath it holding it up. Job said, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. And that's exactly how it is. Oldest book in the Bible, by the way. You think anybody paid any mind to it? That's how men are. They reject this revelation and then go on down the road, and most of the time they've either got it all wrong or they got part of it wrong because they won't believe what this says. If God wrote it, how could it be wrong? If God inspired it, how could it be wrong? So, let's see. Verse 8, he bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds. Here's those waters he's talking about, and somehow, and I've seen this. How many of you looked at some of the photos from the Hubble? Have you seen those big, huge, dark clouds they're picking up? Whether they're dust clouds or I don't know what they are, but there's these huge clouds out there in outer space. He says the cloud is not rent under them. It's not like it's a rain cloud, and there's certainly no holes in it. So this huge expanse could be a cloud, and this guy said a cloud of gas. And it's just empty space, but maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's some type of, whatever it is, it's darkened to blot out the glory that comes from beyond that great deep. So they can't see it. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and sure enough, now you can go look it up, man. Look it up. And they even call it the empty place. And there's different ideas about what that is. So he says he bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under them. So somehow he shrouded that area in some type of cloud, or he's talking about the clouds that are out there. I'm not sure which. I think the kids were over and we were looking at the stars and everything, and I've always seen this. I thought it was clouds. I mean, you know, cumulus clouds. I thought there's wispy clouds up there. And they said, that's the Milky Way. Really? All my life I never knew that the Milky Way was actually milky looking. Like there's a bunch of, you know, dust up there in the Milky Way. So there's a couple other things they call it. I think it's named after Galileo. I can't think of it. I won't try to pronounce it because I can't. Okay, verse 9, we'll be done. It says, he holdeth back the face of his throne and spreadeth his cloud upon it. So God's throne sits upon a sea of glass that is darkened and concealed in dark clouds in space, or dark clouds that are in space, where there is no gap or tear, because he says there's the cloud is not rent under them. Talking to hide his marvelous glory. God is concealed from prying eyes of observation. And the Lord tells you that he will not be observed. He will not be put in a petri dish or under a microscope. He will not be seen from a telescope. You'll believe him by faith or you won't believe him at all. Job 11:17, canst thou by searching find out God? Canst thou find out the Almighty unto perfection? Ecclesiastes 3:11, he hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also he has set the world in their heart so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. God has made it so that you can't figure the thing out scientifically. You know, because then men would glorify themselves and we found him. We know where he's at. All you had to do is read the book and you know where he's at. Just head due north. If you live long enough and get there, you'll find him. That's where he'll be. If you can swim, I mean, hold your breath for a very long time. I mean, we're probably talking about light years just getting through the great deep. This is a huge expanse of water. So, think about, when you're thinking about your Bible, hold on a second, man, I'm going to get ahead of myself here. He holdeth back the face of his throne and spreadeth his cloud upon it. Let me make this observation. Colossians 1:15 says, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. So if you were to be up in the throne room, past the great deep, on the sea of glass, and you were to see the throne, there'd be nothing on it. Why? He's the invisible God. So what does the Lord do? He places a cloud on it. I'm thinking it's a cloud that is in motion, enfolding itself. You cannot make an image of that because it never stops changing form, but it's just kind of like, it's just a cloud. I mean, that's what I think in my mind, because it says, and spreadeth his cloud upon it. What? Upon the face of the throne, I guess. I mean, maybe he has to do that to let the angels know that he's home. I mean, if nothing's there and you can't see it. So maybe he has to do it that way so everybody knows, yeah, I'm here. I haven't gone anywhere. Now, Jesus Christ, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature, he sits at the right hand. Well, sitting there and there's nobody else next to him that you can see. So God puts a cloud. That's what it says. So the Lord places a cloud upon his throne. In Exodus 20:21, it says, and the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near unto the thick darkness where God was. Now this is something I'm having difficulty trying to figure out. There's this light. In God is light, in him is no darkness, but he dwells in the thick darkness. Outer space is thick darkness. I mean, you get out there, man, I mean, other than the stars and everything, it's dark. But it says God dwells in the thick darkness, or it says where God was. I haven't quite figured all that out. If it has to do with these clouds that are around him, I don't know. But one thing for sure, here you have a picture. Satan dwells in the great deep. It says he's Leviathan. It says he maketh the deep to boil like a pot over there as we get farther in the book of Job. And he stands between us and God. He's blocking your way in. That's the way in. That's where God is. And Satan is between us and God. So what God has to do is he has to make a door. So he's going to have to cut out a door because we can't get through that ice. In John 10:1-4, Jesus Christ says, I am the door. In other words, Jesus Christ is going to make a way in there, physically, to get in there. Because when he comes and picks us up, what do we get? We get our new bodies. They're physical. He's physical. And we're going right back up through the same hole that he created coming down. But he's the door. The Bible also talks about him tearing it like a veil. Where the veil is rent, the veil, remember, it separated the children of Israel from God, his presence, on the other side of that veil. He's going to tear that veil and make a way through. So what is he going to do? He's pulling you through the water and the ice like a fish. You know what he talks about over there? He talks about going fishing, where he said he can put a hook in the jaw of Leviathan. Did I catch you? Brings him up with his little Zebco. Get off my line. But we come up through there, and he said, I'll make you fishers of men. Everything that you think is like a metaphor is more real. That's what I'm finding out about this book we're studying. It's a lot more of it's more real than you think. You know, the Bible's like Jesus. Well, what if it's the exact same thing? Not talk about the paper, not talk about the ink, talk about the words. What if they're one and the same? That kind of blows your mind. Of course, then we get accused of something. But you see the pictures that are going on here? And yet when he comes down through the water, and what is the first thing he tells John the Baptist to do? He says, baptize me. Well, you're not a sinner that needs to repent. I know that. But I came down through the water. And I'm going to make you fishers of men. That's the picture. You know, one of the pictures is you can talk about our resurrection. I mean, we're dead while we're under the water. I mean, it's a picture of death. Whew. Coming through the water. Going to make it. All those things are pictures of something that's more literal than you might believe when you look at the cosmology of our universe and the way God set that thing up. Okay. Is there any questions about what we covered tonight? I know some of you are like, you covered all this before. I know I did. But I was also aware we might have visitors tonight. And I thought, man, so I tried to get through it as quick as possible. Is there any Can I repeat it? Please don't make me repeat